There's a tiny little penis in there.
A little child just ran up to me. That's him, if you can see that. He wanted me to blow his bubbles. That sounds really dirty.
Colleen Ballinger did not disappear quietly. She did not issue a clean apology, step away, and let time soften the edges.
I'm very uncomfortable when it comes to confrontation and hate, but I'm a little bit better at it when I can hide behind my camera like a coward.
Instead, she sang for 10 full minutes with a ukulele, while framing years of allegations as a toxic gossip train, joking about the very accusations that were threatening her career, and telling millions of viewers that the only thing she had ever groomed were her cats. That video alone would have been enough to make this story unavoidable, but it wasn't the beginning, and it wasn't even the most unsettling part.
This woman used me. This woman used me.
This is a creator whose brand revolved around an intentionally abrasive character, yet whose real life slowly began to mirror the same behavior. A performer who built a massive audience that quietly skewed younger over time, while her material stayed aggressively adult. A YouTuber who brought teenagers on stage and critiqued their bodies as part of comedy bits. She ran private group chats with fans, some of them minors, asking questions no adult should be asking. Who sent lingerie to a teenage fan and later brushed it off as a silly mistake? Who relied on fans not just for views, but for emotional support, gossip, and defense. We'll also talk about the Netflix special filmed in front of a crowd that looked more like a middle school assembly than a comedy show. We'll talk about skits involving children being asked to reach into her pants on stage. We'll talk about why her live shows kept finding new ways to blur lines that should never have been touched in the first place. Many fans who defended her for years only to realize they had been used as shields, messengers, and attack dogs. Then there are former collaborators, employees, and even family members who became part of the fallout. And yes, we'll talk about the ukulele, because it did not come out of nowhere. So before we get to the collapse, the allegations, and the internet turning on someone it once protected at all costs, we're going to focus and go back to where Miranda Sings actually came from. Miranda did not begin as a calculated brand or a long-term business plan. It started in college, inside theater spaces that rewarded exaggeration, confidence, and performance above all else. She was studying theater, surrounded by vocal performance environments where standing out often meant being louder, stranger, or more memorable than the person next to you. This was the context in which Miranda was born. During this period, Colleen participated in a small student performance where she played a character named Miranda. The character was deliberately unpleasant. She sang off-key, spoke with misplaced authority, and carried herself with an unearned sense of superiority.
I was in college doing a play, like a one-act thing, some student-run thing, and I was cast as the role of Miranda, and I thought it was a show about Disney princesses. That's what I was told. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, I'm gonna get Belle. And then it was like, you're Miranda. And Miranda was like the mean, rude girl in the show. And then when I actually performed it, I think our biggest audience was like 7 people or something. There wasn't a lot of people who came.
The joke was simple and intentionally mean. Miranda was a parody of the type of performer Colleen claimed to recognize in theater circles. Overly confident, unaware of their own lack of skill, and impossible to correct. The humor came from discomfort. You were supposed to cringe, not cheer. It began as a one-off performance, but quickly turned into a recurring bit among friends. Colleen leaned further into the character's worst traits, exaggerating the bad singing, the rudeness, the social blindness, and the refusal to accept criticism.
When my friends came, I would sing just off key, just a little bit, like just under the pitch or just above the pitch, or like be awkward on stage to make them laugh.
Yeah.
And so when I created the character, I needed a name. I just finished that show, and I didn't put much thought into it. It was just, I just did this character with this name, so I'll use that, you know.
Wow.
The more extreme Miranda became, the funnier she seemed to the small audience around her. This was not a character designed to be likable. It was designed to irritate, provoke, and confuse. That confusion became the foundation of Miranda's appeal. When Colleen began uploading early Miranda videos to YouTube, there was no intention of building a career or cultivating a fan base. The videos were meant as inside jokes for friends and family, extensions of the same parody she had already been filming offline.
So I created the character of Miranda, And not you, but like my actual character. And I put it online for my friends. Like, you know, it was a joke for my friends. Because like I said, I used to sing a little bit off the pitch, like in theater and choir to make them laugh. So I created this character that was like a little off with her singing, but was really cocky. You know, I thought it was funny. And I put it on to send to my friends. And so I only uploaded stuff to YouTube to send to family and friends as like a joke, or, you know, performance videos of me to send to my parents at home. I was in college.
They were low effort, poorly produced, and built around a single question. Is this real or is this satire?
Everybody's gonna be there just to see me. And so like all eyes are gonna be on me. So I have to look perfect, okay? And my reputation is on the line. If this party isn't amazing, then my life is over.
Viewers did not immediately know the answer, and that uncertainty drove engagement. Some people watched because they thought Miranda was genuine. Others watched because they were convinced she was a joke, but could not understand why anyone would act this way. Many watched out of irritation, confusion, or disbelief. Hate watching was now the engine that pushed her. At this stage, Miranda was not positioned as a children's character in any meaningful way. The parody was rooted in adult theater culture and aimed at people familiar with performance spaces, auditions, and artistic ego. The humor assumed a level of context. It was mocking a very specific type of adult behavior, not entertaining kids. As these videos spread beyond Colleen's immediate circle, Miranda stopped being an inside joke and started becoming an object of fascination. People shared the videos not because they loved the character, but because they could not look away.
Well, in the beginning, I would do whatever people didn't like. Because in the beginning, originally, I thought it was so funny that people couldn't tell if she was real or not. And so people thought it was real. And
meaning they
thought Miranda was a real person.
Like that
Like
was
Pee Wee
you.
Herman.
Yeah, they thought it
Okay.
was. So for a while, that was it. Like people thought Miranda was a real person. And so whatever people said they didn't like in the comments, I would do it more. Because I was like, who sits and just writes like, these are strangers to me. I don't know these people. And again, this is when it was all new. Like, this is brand new to me into the world.
it's still happening.
Oh yeah, but
I'm a little aware that
like,
it's still happening.
these comments
Yeah,
are
yeah.
crazy.
It's a lot different now. It's much different now than it was. But when they started trickling in, it was like, they'd say, oh, I don't like how you pronounced this word. And so I'd mess up how I pronounce words more moving forward. I've tried to egg on the comments a little bit in the beginning because I thought it was funny that people thought it was a real character.
The irritation was the point. The confusion was the hook. And without realizing it, Colleen had stumbled into a format that rewarded escalation. The more unbearable Miranda became, the more attention she received. And that feedback loop would soon stop being accidental. As the videos continued to circulate, Miranda began attracting an audience that extended beyond Colleen's immediate social circle. Early traction appeared strongest among older viewers, theater-adjacent audiences, and adults already familiar with performance satire.
It was an older audience for the first few years of my career, and I was doing a lot of, nightclubs and stuff like that.
Like, how old do you think?
I just graduated college, so there were people my age, but it was the gay theater community. It was like a lot of like older gay men that would like come to my shows, and so, you know, my comedy was it was crass and over the top and whatever, but they liked that they were in on this joke. And Miranda was a lot more subtle at the beginning too. You know, over time it became this like really dramatic, more cartoony, like intense character, but like in the beginning it was much more subtle.
Many of these viewers recognized the character as an exaggeration of traits commonly mocked within artistic spaces, and that recognition helped the character spread. During this phase, the comedy leaned heavily on shock and discomfort. Miranda's humor relied on crude phrasing, deliberate ignorance, and exaggerated confidence delivered without self-awareness. Innuendo appeared frequently, often framed as accidental or misunderstood by the character herself. The jokes were not subtle, but they were delivered through a persona that claimed innocence, allowing the material to exist in a space where offensiveness could be dismissed as part of the act. Rather than softening the character as viewership increased, Colleen amplified the very traits that drew criticism. The smeared lipstick became more pronounced. Words were mispronounced more aggressively. Miranda's arrogance grew louder and more rigid. When viewers reacted strongly, whether positively or negatively, those reactions seemed to signal which elements were the most effective at holding attention.
Oh my God! Look at you're a totally different person.
This created a pattern where escalation became the default response. The character did not evolve toward restraint or refinement. Instead, the performance grew more extreme as engagement increased. Whether intentionally or not, the feedback loop favored exaggeration over moderation. And the version of Miranda that traveled furthest was the one that pushed the hardest against social comfort. As Miranda's reach expanded, the composition of the audience began to shift. Over time, viewership skewed younger, particularly in online spaces where clips circulated without context and were picked up through recommendation systems and short-form sharing. The character's exaggerated expressions, catchphrases, and visual absurdity translated easily into formats that younger viewers encountered, even if they were not the original target audience.
When Miranda came to be, it really wasn't, like, that was for an adult audience.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I certainly never thought I'm making a kid show or a kid character or something to entertain children. Like, that was never the goal. Ever, actually, in my career. And even
despite this change, the material itself remained largely consistent. The tone, structure, and comedic devices did not undergo a significant adjustment to reflect the evolving demographic. Innuendo, crude phrasing, and adult-coded jokes continued to appear, delivered through the same framework of intentional misunderstanding and performative innocence that had defined Miranda from the beginning. In later reflections, Colleen stated that Miranda was never created for children and that she resisted having the character classified as kids' content. She described frustration with the way the character was sometimes framed or marketed by others, emphasizing that the original intent was satire aimed at adults familiar with theater culture rather than a younger audience.
My audience kind of grew. And it went from this older audience to, it spread, and there was now a lot more teens watching me. Mm-hmm. I didn't adjust my comedy very much because I was like, well, they found me doing this, so this is what they like, and this is what I like, so I'm going to keep doing the comedy they like. And I did adjust it a little bit over time. But one thing that I didn't do, and I should have been much more careful about, is I didn't adjust my interactions with my fans. And that's something I regret a lot because, like I said earlier, the difference between me and a mainstream celebrity, at least in the beginning, was that I was attainable and, look, she'll talk to us, she'll interact with us, and she's talking to us from her living room, she'll talk about anything. And she's so open and she'll talk one-on-one with us. She meets us in person at her shows and whatnot, and we know her, and I didn't think about when I was interacting with my fans, I didn't think about a power dynamic that could have been there. I didn't think about a parasocial relationship, and I should have. I should have been more responsible in thinking about that, but I didn't even think of myself that way. I was like, yeah, we are friends. Like, I think I felt the same way, and so for me, I was like, well, I'm just talking to my friends. I talk to all of them like they're my friends, my sisters, all the fans, and I definitely should have been more careful with the way I was joking with them and the things I was saying to them.
At the same time, the reality of live performances suggested a different outcome. Public discussions surrounding tours and appearances acknowledged that a substantial portion of attendees were teenagers. This was not treated as a secret or anomaly, but as an observable part of the audience makeup. The presence of large numbers of teens at shows became an accepted aspect of Miranda's success, even as the character's intended audience was described differently. By this point, a tension had formed between intent and outcome. The character was framed as adult-oriented satire, while the audience engaging most visibly with the content was increasingly young. The material remained largely unchanged, but the context in which it was received had shifted, creating a gap that would continue to widen as the platform grew. As Miranda's online presence stabilized, the character moved beyond the screen and into live performance.
A little breeze and I'll see all the bits. So this is a very good example of what you don't want to dress like. So this is
These shows were not tightly scripted in the traditional sense. Instead, they relied on spontaneous exchanges, physical comedy, and the unpredictable energy of whoever was pulled into the act. Volunteers were routinely brought on stage, asked questions, given instructions, or placed into bits designed to play off Miranda's lack of social awareness. The structure of the show depended on these moments. Each performance was shaped by the reactions of the crowd, and the presence of willing participants created a sense of exclusivity for those involved. Being noticed, selected, or spoken to became part of the appeal. At the same time, the Miranda brand expanded into publishing. Books such as Self-Help and My Diary were released and marketed directly to the existing fan base. While framed as comedic works, the tone and humor mirrored the online character, including crude phrasing and exaggerated bodily jokes. The books were positioned as extensions of the Miranda persona rather than standalone literary projects, reinforcing the idea that fans could engage with the character across multiple formats. In 2019, a Netflix comedy special further solidified Miranda's position as a touring performer.
Hey guys, it's me, Miranda. You know, pregnancy is the most beautiful thing in the whole world for everyone who isn't pregnant.
Although framed as stand-up, the special relied extensively on musical segments, call and response jokes, and crowd interaction rather than traditional observational comedy.
Anything without offending someone. Like, I can't even post an Instagram picture. This picture offended the vegans. This picture offended the mothers. This picture offended everyone.
The performance mirrored the structure of the live tours, placing the audience at the center of the experience and reinforcing the participatory nature of the act. By this stage, Miranda had become more than an online character. The persona functioned as a touring act, a publishing brand, and a television property, all built on the same foundation of exaggerated ignorance and audience engagement. The scale had increased, but the mechanics remained familiar, with participation and improvisation continuing to drive the experience forward. As live shows became the primary engine of Miranda's success, certain recurring segments began appearing consistently across tours. These bits were designed to be familiar enough for repeat audiences while still allowing room for improvisation. Over time, several of these segments involved direct participation from audience members, including teenagers and children who were brought on stage as part of the act. One of the most repeated segments was the yoga challenge. In this skit, audience volunteers were instructed to perform exaggerated stretching and positioning exercises alongside Miranda. The humor relied on Miranda's lack of physical awareness and her inability to understand social cues. At the time, this segment was framed as absurd and awkward rather than overtly suggestive. Years later, however, a former participant who had been a teenager at the time publicly criticized the experience, describing discomfort with the physical positioning and the way the interaction was presented in front of a large crowd.
And a show, Colleen frequently has segments where she calls people up on stage. One of those segments was the porn bit, which I'm not really going to be explaining in this video, but that's why I was kind of trying to dress skimpy so that I would be called up on stage and basically get degraded by Miranda. But I did not get called up for that. I got called up for the yoga challenge. Now, as soon as I stood up from the audience, I saw Colleen's eyes widen because she realized I was not wearing pants. But for some reason, that didn't stop her from continuing. In fact, no adult at any point stepped in this situation. So we get to the point in the yoga challenge where I am laying down and Colleen is spreading my legs basically as far as she can. She spreads them so far that you can see the spandex I was wearing under my romper, which thank God I was wearing. Now, the original video posted by Xandar, I'm sorry if I pronounced her name wrong, is only a screenshot, but there is a whole video of this. But that screenshot is the most important because that is the moment I will never forget, where I was laying under Colleen and she was smirking down at me while thousands of people were laughing, and I was terrified that my body wasn't covered up enough by the spandex or the romper. I basically felt naked, so it felt incredibly sexually violating. I was younger and my body was still developing and I was still becoming comfortable with myself, so for her to use my body as entertainment on stage really set my confidence back quite a lot. And not to mention, after all this, after the show, I had to walk back to my car where there was many men staring at me in a very predatory way that they were not looking at me before because of how exposed I had been on stage.
Colleen would later explain the rationale behind this specific segment in her live shows.
It was a challenge on YouTube for a while for people to try out different yoga poses. Like, couples would do it together because if you're not experienced in yoga, it's difficult to do. And so, since I'm a YouTuber on my live shows, sometimes I would do challenges from YouTube. So I did that challenge and I'd have people come up on stage and we would try out different yoga poses that popped up on the screen. And obviously we could never do them, and I would be, flailing about as Miranda. And there was one pose where there are two people and both legs are spread open, you're holding each other's legs. And I genuinely never thought of it as a sexual or inappropriate thing. To me, the joke was that when the legs were open to do the pose, the fart sound effect came on screen. So it was like, once the legs opened up, there was a fart sound. And to me, that was all I thought that joke was. I never knew that was something that would make someone feel uncomfortable and trigger emotions and feelings. I feel terrible about that. Genuinely, when I heard about that, I felt so bad, because that is something I'd never want to do, is trigger anyone, but especially a girl who's been through horrible things.
Another recurring bit involved what became known as the cheese ball or Cheeto skit. In this segment, Miranda would place snacks inside her pants and instruct an audience member to retrieve them. The joke depended on Miranda's exaggerated obliviousness and the shock value of the request. The participants' discomfort, confusion, or hesitation often became part of the punchline. This skit appeared multiple times across tours and was later acknowledged and discussed in retrospective interviews.
There is a clip of YouTube of a little boy eating Cheetos out of your pants. Could you explain that for the audience, please?
Pulling Cheetos. That makes it sound more egregious. Like he's physically eating out of her pants. He wasn't. He was taking one.
Oh, he was taking see? That's how things get twisted.
Right. Yeah.
So could you explain it, please?
Well, I mean, what a crazy thing to hear, that there's a woman on stage and there's a young person taking food out of her pants and eating it on stage. I mean, that's crazy. A lot of the joke with Miranda was that I would say and do things that were inappropriate or had some sort of sexual innuendo to them or something like that, and it went over the character's head. Like, Miranda was not aware that she was saying something that could be taken the wrong way. That was a lot of the jokes that I did as the character. And so in that particular part of the show that I did, it was probably 8 to 10 years ago that I used to do that bit. Miranda was teaching the audience how to sneak food into the movie theater. And so I stuffed a big bag of cheese balls in my pants. Now, I was wearing layers of clothing because throughout the show, I put more clothes on over my clothes on stage. When I transitioned from me into Miranda, I, in front of everyone, put on more clothes. So I'm wearing lots of layers of clothing, and then there's the cheese balls in a bag and in my pants. And so initially I would bring up an adult, and I'd start eating the snack as we're, quote unquote, watching this movie. And then I'd say, do you want a snack? And then they would take a cheese ball from the top of the bag and eat it. It was supposed to be like, she doesn't realize how inappropriate this looks. And then, there's a clip, like you said, of when a younger person came on stage and did that with me. And the audience is laughing and you could see my reaction, like, this is a weird situation that I'm in here, but it got a big laugh and everyone knew that it was in jest. And this is me trying to, rationalize. That's the word. Yes, rationalize the situation. But shortly after, I'd say within a year of doing that joke, I cut it because I was like, I think this.
Within a year of doing that joke, you what?
Cut it. I stopped doing it because it was. My fans a lot of them were younger at this point, so I was like, I'm not. Obviously, this joke is not. I'm not going to do this anymore. It's not working. It's not appropriate.
A separate routine titled Story of My Birth placed audience members into exaggerated family roles during the retelling of Miranda's origin story. Teenagers and sometimes younger participants were assigned positions within the narrative, with humor drawn from awkward role assignments, bodily jokes, and exaggerated misunderstandings. While framed as cartoonish storytelling, the segment relied on innuendo and discomfort similar to other parts of the act. At the time, these routines were treated as standard elements of the show rather than exceptions. Audience participation was a central feature, and the age of volunteers was not always addressed within the performance itself. As the tours continued, these segments became part of the recognizable structure of a Miranda show, repeated across venues with minimal variation, even as the audience composition remained visibly youthful. In Colleen's Netflix comedy special that was earlier referenced, it's important to also state that much of its runtime revolved around fixation on criticism. Large portions of the show were structured around reading negative comments on screen, many of which appeared juvenile in spelling, tone, and phrasing. Rather than treating these as background noise, this special centered them, mocking their wording and using them as punchlines. The imbalance was noticeable. A grown performer with a global platform is framing her opposition through comments that seem to come from children, then ridiculing them in front of a live audience. Alongside the growth of live performances, Colleen's online presence continued to evolve in a more informal direction. She often described YouTube not as a workplace or a broadcast platform, but as a personal space where she could speak freely and casually.
Well, that was the whole thing, right? I mean, when I started doing YouTube, it was like kind of when YouTube started.
Yeah.
So the whole appeal of it, I feel like back then, was that these people who were getting famous online, they weren't celebrities. They were real people. We were in our home. Like, that was the appeal of it, is that we were your friend, someone who's just, I'm talking to you from my living room, from my kitchen, talking about my day. So yeah, definitely it's really hard to separate the two between like what's private home life and then what's part of the public persona. Mm-hmm. To me, it was always one and the same. So, and that was, that was a hard thing for me to figure out the lines and boundaries of that, because I thought that was the whole appeal of like back then, when I started.
Videos were framed as conversations rather than productions, reinforcing the idea that the audience was being invited into her everyday life rather than observing a performance from a distance. This framing influenced how she spoke to viewers. Fans were frequently addressed as friends, peers, or people she felt personally connected to.
Talk one-on-one with us. She meets us in person at her shows and whatnot, and we know her, and I didn't think about when I was interacting with my fans, I didn't think about a power dynamic that could have been there. I didn't think about a parasocial relationship, and I should have. I should have been more responsible in thinking about that, but I didn't even think of myself that way. I was like, yeah, we are friends. Like, I think I felt the same way. And so for me, I was like, well, I'm just talking to my friends. I talk to all of them like they're my friends, my sisters, all the fans. And
the language used in videos reduced the perceived distance between creator and audience, suggesting a mutual, almost equal relationship rather than one defined by visibility, influence, or scale. Over time, this tone became a consistent feature of her online identity. As her online presence became more personal, communication with fans extended beyond public platforms. Private group chats were created where Colleen interacted directly with selected fans. One of the most frequently referenced spaces was a group chat known as Weenies, which included a mix of participants, some of whom were minors at the time. Within these chats, conversations moved away from surface-level fandom and into more personal territory. Messages included adult-coded humor, references to intimate or bodily topics, and casual discussions that did not clearly distinguish between appropriate and inappropriate subject matter for the ages involved. The tone was informal and familiar, mirroring the way Colleen framed her public content as conversational rather than professional. At the time, participation in these chats was perceived by many members as a form of recognition. Being included suggested closeness and trust, reinforcing the idea that access to the creator was a reward for loyalty.
She's also asking, what's your favorite position? These are children.
Several former participants later described feeling singled out or valued during these interactions, particularly given Colleen's visibility and status.
The fact that you would participate in group chats with your fans, and there were minors in those chats, and there would be questions regarding their virginity and sex positions.
Right.
Inappropriate questions are being asked to underage people. What was going on?
That's true. It's completely inappropriate. And I used to do this weekly question and answer thing with my audience. And that particular group chat was full of a bunch of different fans of all ages, but they would they were crass and funny and ridiculous, and they would, whenever I asked for questions for my channel, they would ask me questions like that. They would ask me questions they knew I wouldn't answer, that were over the top, inappropriate. So when one of them, which this part of the conversation is now deleted, those parts of the conversations are deleted or gone or somehow, I don't know, but when they asked for questions for theirs, I was trying to do the same jokes that they had just previously been doing with me. Stupid and inappropriate, shouldn't have done it. I feel really embarrassed and stupid. And
did you know they were underage at the time?
In later discussions, Colleen acknowledged that she was aware minors were present in these chats.
I knew that there were teenagers in the chat, yeah. I did know that. And I also thought...
She characterized the interactions as joking, casual, and lacking harmful intent, framing them as extensions of her informal online persona rather than deliberate boundary crossings. The emphasis was placed on tone rather than structure, suggesting that the absence of malicious intent outweighed concerns about context. With distance, however, some former members described a shift in how they understood those experiences. What initially felt exciting or affirming later appeared unsettling when reconsidered from an adult perspective.
She would send me Snapchats of like Eric shirtless getting off of the pill, and she would caption it and be like, so sexy. And I mean, I was like 15 at this time.
But with age came wisdom and clarity.
I feel like it's like a different perspective. You're like, oh my God, why would someone ever say that thing to someone? You're like, wait, that was literally me.
The familiarity that once felt flattering was reinterpreted as blurred boundaries, shaped by age, access, and the uneven nature of the relationship itself. As private communication deepened, the tone of those spaces appeared to shift from casual engagement into something more insular. According to accounts from former fans, Colleen sometimes used these private chats to vent frustrations about people in her professional and personal life. This allegedly included complaints about peers and an ex-partner, shared not with her colleagues, but with fans who were younger and deeply invested in her approval. The effect was subtle but consequential. Fans were not just observers of drama, but were positioned as confidants, privy to information they were not meant to have. Within that dynamic, some fans later claimed they felt nudged toward defending her or responding to critics on her behalf. This was not always described as explicit instruction, but rather as an implied expectation. When grievances were shared in emotionally charged terms, fans often interpreted that as a cue to act. Coordinated replies, pylons, or targeted responses toward perceived enemies began to feel normalized. Support became performative, measured not just by admiration, but by willingness to confront others. Over time, former participants described a culture forming inside these private spaces that contrasted sharply with Colleen's public-facing warmth. While fans were praised openly and framed as a loving community, some accounts suggest that in private chats, certain fans became subjects of ridicule. Mistakes, awkward behavior, or perceived disloyalty were mocked behind the scenes, sometimes by this same person who publicly emphasized kindness and gratitude. The split between outward affection and inward mockery created a hierarchy. Some fans felt protected and close, while others were quietly othered. During live streams, an undergarment item became a recurring joke. It was referenced repeatedly, framed as absurd rather than serious, and treated as part of the broader shock-based humor that surrounded the Miranda persona. Over time, the joke escalated beyond commentary. After repeated prompting from a fan named Adam McIntyre, the item was mailed to him. Adam was underage at the time. The exchange was initially framed within the same joking context as the livestream bits, but the act itself crossed into a different category. In later statements, Colleen acknowledged that sending the item was inappropriate and described it as a serious lapse in judgment.
I should have realized and recognized how dumb that was and never sent it to him, no matter how much he asked. It was a silly, stupid mistake that now is being blown way out of proportion.
She emphasized that it should not have happened and framed it as a mistake rather than an intentional act. In retrospect, the incident became a focal point, because it condensed several ongoing issues into a single moment. Informality, fan access, escalation of jokes, and a lack of clear boundaries all converged. Among the specific claims, Adam alleged that Colleen shared personal problems with him, involving him in behind-the-scenes drama, and treated him as emotional support rather than maintaining clear distance. He also referenced the earlier undergarment incident, describing it as part of a broader pattern rather than an isolated joke. Eventually, he said the communication slowed and then stopped abruptly, leaving him feeling discarded after having been encouraged into closeness.
She was slowly starting to put the blame and guilt onto me for stuff that she had already approved and was going to tweet on her own whether she had given me the password or not. I got left unread and I was ignored from this point on.
The reaction from her audience followed quickly. Many fans rallied to the defense of Colleen, questioning Adam's motives, credibility, and character. Adam became the target of harassment, mockery, and dismissal across platforms, with fans positioning him as the source of harm rather than the person describing it. The power imbalance reversed publicly, with a teenage accuser facing the collective weight of an established fan base. As the situation unfolded, another layer of fan involvement emerged through Cody Tyler, a devoted supporter who became instrumental in shaping the public response. According to later accounts, Colleen privately shared messages and context with Cody that framed the situation in a way that positioned her as misunderstood and unfairly targeted. These private communications were not presented as official statements, but they carried weight. Coming directly from Colleen, they were interpreted as insider truth rather than opinion. Acting on that understanding, Cody released a public video criticizing Adam. The video echoed many of the same themes present in Colleen's response, emphasizing intent, minimizing harm, and casting doubt on Adam's account. At the time, the video was received positively by parts of the fandom and functioned as an unofficial defense, one that allowed Colleen to remain somewhat removed while others spoke on her behalf. Years later, the framing shifted. In 2023, Cody revisited the situation and acknowledged that their involvement had been influenced by incomplete information and emotional positioning.
I want people to understand this and all of this is all manipulation. They were planning this.
They described feeling manipulated by the way details were shared and recognized that their video had contributed to harm. The original upload was removed, and the admission reframed Cody's role not as an independent critic, but as a fan drawn into narrative control without full awareness of the consequences.
I will leave the video up. I'm sorry that I unlisted it for the small amount of time that I did. It wasn't because I was not sorry anymore. It's just, it's a lot. It's just so much to have all these people attack me.
Another account surfaced through Johnny, whose involvement with the Miranda ecosystem followed a familiar trajectory. He entered the fandom as a teenager, first as a supporter, and later as someone brought closer into the professional orbit. Over time, that proximity turned into employment, with Johnny joining the Miranda tour environment in a working capacity. What began as admiration evolved into dependency, where access and opportunity were tied directly to staying in favor. Johnny later described his experience on tour as emotionally taxing.
I just don't want to sit back anymore and watch repeat offenders get away with doing this to people.
He alleged that Colleen's longtime assistant, Corey, subjected him to repeated mistreatment. This reportedly took the form of belittling behavior, manipulation, and pressure that extended beyond normal workplace stress. According to Johnny, the environment blurred professional boundaries, making it difficult to distinguish between personal loyalty and job expectations.
It's repeated offenses, it's tactical, it's evil, manipulative. I can't stay silent anymore.
Central to his account was the claim that Colleen was aware of these dynamics. He stated that the behavior was visible and ongoing, yet no meaningful intervention occurred. Whether through inaction or dismissal, the structure remained unchanged, allowing the same patterns to continue. For someone who had entered the space as a fan, the imbalance was amplified. Criticism felt risky, and speaking up carried the fear of losing access entirely. Johnny also pointed to structural issues within the tour itself. He described long working hours, low compensation, and a sense of isolation from peers outside the Miranda world. As more accounts surfaced, attention widened beyond Colleen herself and toward the broader environment surrounding her, including members of the Ballinger family. What had initially appeared as isolated incidents began to look, to some observers, like recurring boundary issues across the same social and professional ecosystem. One set of accusations involved Colleen's ex-husband. According to claims raised publicly, he had interactions with a minor fan that were described as inappropriate in tone and familiarity.
I started getting invited to shows. I started getting asked to do little YouTube collaborations here and there. And you always told me that I was like a brother to you, and that if you ever made it big, you were gonna take me with you.
The details focus less on explicit conduct and more on the nature of the communication itself. Critics questioned why an adult closely associated with a fan-driven brand was engaging directly with minors at all, particularly in private or semi-private contexts.
This man, I literally felt like was an older brother to me. He just ghosted me. He went ghost.
While the allegations did not result in legal action, they added to a growing perception that boundaries within the Miranda sphere were loosely enforced, even outside Colleen's different actions. Further scrutiny fell on Colleen's brother Trent. Multiple accounts alleged that he had been messaging teenage fans, with screenshots and timelines presented to suggest a pattern rather than a single misstep. The messages were described as overly familiar and in some cases uncomfortable in tone. It followed the same pattern with Colleen's sister. Rachel was also mentioning allegations regarding blurred boundaries with fans. These claims centered on excessive closeness, informal communication, and interactions that resembled friendship more than creator-audience distance. While less severe in content compared to other accusations, they reinforced the idea that the family's online presence often treated fans as peers, regardless of age, rather than maintaining professional separation. Finally, questions were additionally raised about Colleen's father, Tim, specifically regarding his public online activity. Observers highlighted social media behavior that they found uncomfortable or out of step with expectations for someone adjacent to a fan base containing many minors. While these concerns were more observational than accusatory, they contributed to the broader narrative that the Ballinger family operated within a digital culture that consistently underestimated how public actions could be interpreted. Individually, each allegation varied in severity and clarity. Taken together, they shifted the focus from one creator's conduct to a wider pattern of informal access, porous boundaries, and a family brand built around closeness without clear guardrails. The recurring theme was not identical behavior, but a shared environment where personal interaction with fans, including minors, was normalized rather than restricted. Alongside personal allegations, questions began to surface about the operational side of Colleen's work, particularly her annual charity fundraisers. These fundraisers were highly publicized and framed as major philanthropic efforts, often tied to emotional appeals and fan participation. Over time, however, concerns were raised about transparency.
Money that you donated to the exact amount of organizations and the amount of money that you personally donated as well. Please show it.
Former supporters began asking for clearer documentation showing where the funds were going and how much was actually being donated. Requests for itemized breakdowns and receipts circulated publicly, but no detailed accounting was released in response. The absence of follow-up did not prove wrongdoing on its own, but it left unanswered questions that lingered as trust eroded. Separate from financial concerns, allegations also emerged from within professional settings. A former writer from the Netflix series Haters Back Off described the work environment as tense and uncomfortable. According to this account, the set culture involved blurred boundaries and remarks that crossed professional lines.
If you thought things could not get worse for Colleen Ballinger after her non-apology ukulele song, then unfortunately you're wrong. Things got worse. April Cordo-Keough has released an article that she wrote about her time in the writer's room for the show Haters Back Off. And somehow it's even worse than I thought it was going to be. April, who's pictured right here next to me, was a writer's assistant, showrunner's assistant, and the writer's PA on Haters Back Off, which was Colleen Ballinger's Netflix show. And it was based off of the character Miranda Sings. One of the responsibilities that April had was to sit in on meetings and take notes and write down Colleen's requests. And she had some very problematic requests. Apparently there was a lot of conversations amongst the showrunners and the writers team about diversity, and Colleen made it known in a meeting that she did not want a lot of people of color on screen because the show was meant to take place in Washington and she thought it would be distracting. In another meeting, they discussed turning an Asian market into a bodega for the show, and Colleen made it known that she wanted all of the Asian shit out of there and not to be seen. Allegedly. Apparently, not only would she make cruel and nasty jokes at the expense of the staff, but she would also make them spend the first hour or so of their morning talking to her about her marital problems and her complaining about how her fans weren't on board with her black scent. But then, right below me here is an awful story. She says, I recall overhearing her once brag that a creator was being canceled for saying the N-word, and if you think she went with N-word instead of hitting that hard R, then you haven't been paying attention, and that she would never be stupid enough to get caught doing something like that. Girl, what? What? She also provided this screenshot of her text to her friend when Colleen allegedly saw a black actor do an audition tape, and then apparently the lighting was not bright enough, and so she yelled out, "Where is he?" As in, "I can't see him, he's too black." That's how she took it. And honestly, I don't blame her, because that is how it looks. April also tells stories about how she felt like Colleen was personally going after her because she knew that April did not appreciate some of the content in the show, such as the sexualization of the relationship between Miranda and the uncle, and that there were a lot of jokes that she was really uncomfortable with. So according to April, she felt like Colleen went out of her way to make her more uncomfortable, even going as far as to name a villain character after her, just to see how she would react. And if you know anything about being in Hollywood, you know that someone in April's position, who this was her first job ever, she did not have the ability to speak up and advocate for herself without the risk of losing her job. And she knew that. And of course, April points out she was the only black person working in this office. So that made things even more complicated and stressful for her. Her article is really worth reading, and I think her story is important. So if you want to read it, please go to her website, apologizetome.com, and you can see the whole thing for yourself.
One thing that was eye-catching was that the writer further claimed that inappropriate family dynamic humor was not incidental, but actively encouraged during the creative process. Jokes involving exaggerated parental roles, infantilization, and uncomfortable relational framing were reportedly pushed into scripts rather than discouraged. While these claims reflected a single perspective, they aligned with broader criticism that the Miranda persona relied heavily on boundary-testing humor, not just on stage, but within the production itself. Rather than issuing a conventional statement, she uploaded a musical video built around a ukulele melody. The song framed the allegations and criticisms surrounding her as exaggerated humor, repeatedly characterizing the backlash as toxic gossip rather than addressing it as a series of specific claims.
Hey, it's been a while since you saw my face. I haven't been doing so great, so I took a little break. So a lot of people are saying some things about me that aren't quite true. Doesn't matter if it's true though, just as long as it's entertaining to you. Right? You guys having fun? All aboard the toxic gossip train. You're chugging down the tracks of misinformation. The toxic gossip train.
The choice of format was consistent with her long-standing use of music to mediate discomfort, but the timing and subject matter made the approach unusually charged. Within the song, only a narrow range of allegations were acknowledged. Serious claims were referenced briefly or indirectly, while others were dismissed outright.
Toxic gossip train. Locomotives fueled with hateful accusations. The toxic gossip train. Steamroll over someone's reputation. Toxic gossip train. Hop on board but close your eyes, otherwise you'll realize that the train is made of lies, and that person you despise maybe didn't deserve to die, but hey. All aboard the toxic gossip train. You're chugging down the tracks of misinformation. The toxic gossip train. You got a one-way ticket to manipulation station. Toxic gossip train. Tie me to the tracks and harass me for my past. 'Cause rumors look like
Humor was used to blunt the weight of the accusations, with lyrics implying that critics are motivated by drama, misinformation, or malicious content. The tone remained light, even when touching on topics that had previously been described as harmful by those involved. The framing placed emphasis on intent and exhaustion rather than impact, shifting focus away from the people making the claims. The reaction was swift and overwhelmingly negative. Many viewers interpreted the video as dismissive, not because it denied wrongdoing entirely, but because it treated this situation as content. Following the release, several individuals who had previously spoken privately chose to respond publicly. Alleged victims reiterated their accounts, clarifying timelines and emphasizing how the response made them feel. Former fans also spoke out, describing the video as the moment they disengaged completely. Instead of closing the chapter, the ukulele response intensified scrutiny. It did not introduce new facts, but it reshaped public perception by reinforcing the idea that the situation was being handled as performance rather than accountability. As the controversy intensified, the consequences extended beyond statements and responses into real-world fallout. Adam reported receiving threats severe enough that he filed police reports. At the same time, former fans began sharing broader reflections on their experiences within the fandom. Many described a parasocial culture that encouraged emotional investment beyond healthy boundaries. Support was not limited to watching videos or attending shows. It often involved unpaid labor, moderating spaces, defending Colleen online, managing fan accounts, and participating in coordinated efforts to protect her image. What felt like community at the time later appeared to some as obligation. Several former fans explained that the structure rewarded proximity and loyalty while discouraging dissent. Questioning behavior, stepping back, or expressing discomfort risked social exclusion. Over time, this created an environment where boundaries eroded quietly, sustained by a belief that closeness equaled trust. When allegations surfaced, that same structure amplified harm. Fans who once felt valued found themselves targeted for speaking out, while others grappled with the realization that what they had contributed to emotionally and material had not been reciprocal. The fallout reframed the story from one creator's actions to the broader system that surrounded her. Safety concerns, emotional labor, and long-term psychological impact became part of the discussion, underscoring that the damage was not confined to a single incident or response, but embedded in years of interaction and expectation. After the collapse of her public image, Colleen eventually returned to the subject in a long-form interview that reframed the entire period as reflection rather than defense. In this setting, she acknowledged a series of failures she had not previously articulated in such direct terms. She described her judgment as poor, admitted that boundaries were not properly maintained, and stated that her earlier response, including the musical apology, was mishandled.
It was being decided for me by people talking about it. My intention wasn't to hurt or do anything negative ever. Now, that doesn't mean that people weren't hurt.
Right.
And that's the part that I wish I had paid more attention to. But I obviously didn't handle the situation the way that I should have. And it's really embarrassing. I wish that I could handle it a lot differently than I did.
When you say that, are you talking about like the apology
Talking
videos?
about a musical instrument that I should have not picked up. Yes, I mean, I should have listened to what people were saying.
This marked a tonal shift from minimizing language toward a more self-critical posture, at least on the surface. At the same time, she drew a distinction between intent and outcome. She denied any deliberate effort to manipulate, exploit, or harm fans, framing the situation as one where casual behavior and misplaced trust led to consequences she did not anticipate.
My intention and my actions have never been fueled with the desire to manipulate or groom anybody ever. That has never been something I have done or will ever do. And
within that framing, harm was acknowledged as real, but positioned as an unintended result rather than a foreseeable risk. The emphasis remained on how actions were perceived rather than why those actions occurred in the first place. She addressed specific incidents more directly than before. Group chats were described as inappropriate in retrospect, particularly given the ages involved. Stage bits that relied on audience participation were characterized as poorly thought through. The lingerie incident was named explicitly as a serious mistake, one she said should have never happened.
10 years ago, something like that, I was doing a live stream, and I always loved giving away gifts to my fans online, so I would send them like a bobby pin of Miranda's or a lipstick of Miranda, an old shirt, you know. Usually it was to encourage them to donate to a charity event that I would do every year, but I loved giving out stuff. And so I was doing a live stream like I did pretty often, and I was opening up a box of clothes that I had bought, and in it was this underwear bra set that I didn't order, and it was we were all laughing about it. So everyone in the chat was laughing about it, me and my friend, and he actually put it on over his clothes and was like, look at this, and we were laughing about it. And there are people in the comments saying, oh, send that to me, send that one to me. And we were like, we're not gonna do that, that's crazy. But then there's one fan in particular who kept asking us to send it. And I was like, obviously you can tell in the live, like I'm like hesitant about it because there is a little bit of brains in there somewhere that was like, maybe not, because I hesitated. But then I was like, and I didn't send it. I didn't. But then it was just became an inside joke with the fandom, and everyone was like telling me to send it, and he kept asking for it. It was like months of this. And so finally I did, and it was very public and as a joke. And it was like a part of my brain was missing in action of like, hey, this is not a good idea. This looks bad. It wasn't a pair of my something that I sent to a young fan in a inappropriate way, but it was inappropriate. Like, why would what part of me thought like, everyone will know this is a silly joke in the fandom? Like I wish I'd never done that. That was so inappropriate. And if he was made to feel uncomfortable because of that, like, I feel terrible and I'm so sorry because that was not my intention with that. I thought it was like a silly inside joke with the whole fandom. It was all very public and I thought it was a silly thing and it was so stupid.
These acknowledgments aligned with the most commonly cited criticisms, though they were delivered as admissions of error rather than explanations of process or decision-making. A significant portion of the interview focused inward. Colleen spoke at length about therapy, anxiety, and what she described as a loss of personal identity after years of tying self-worth to audience approval. She portrayed her relationship with fans as something that gradually replaced healthier forms of validation, creating dependency rather than distance. In this framing, the collapse of that support system was destabilizing, leaving her to reassess who she was without constant affirmation. The interview concluded with her presenting the period as one of growth. She framed the fallout as a forced reckoning that exposed patterns she needed to confront. Learning, self-awareness, and change were emphasized as ongoing rather than complete. What remained unresolved was the gap between reflection and repair. While the narrative focused on personal development, it offered little clarity on how those lessons would translate into concrete boundaries or accountability beyond self-described insight.